Hey Justin, thanks for weighing in with this question. Okay, yeah, so just looking at this music, I just want to give you a couple caveats first off. I'm not a classical guitarist. I have done some classical guitar like etudes. I've studied some fingerstyle techniques. I do have like a jazz guitar background, and one of my teachers was like a mentee and a student of Lenny Breau, who is this really incredible, primarily fingerstyle jazz guitarist. I also have pretty extensive experience for my age, which is 30, as a sort of an avant-garde contemporary classical composer. So I have a lot of experience with notated music, but primarily as a writer rather than as somebody who performs this music. So I'm connected to this in a lot of ways, but I'm not like a professor of classical guitar at like a conservatory. Those are just kind of my caveats, but I think I should still be able to weigh in some ways that help you. Okay, and so we're just going to pull up this document. Okay, so let's look at what's going on here. So you're talking about usually taking things one measure at a time, and that helps. Obviously, there's a lot of ink on the page here, and we're just going to ignore that it's kind of grainy when we zoom in because, this isn't a PDF. This is a JPEG file. But we can see a few things right away. So the positions for all of this, you might already know this. This is just basic stuff. The positions for all of this are labeled. So we have, fifth position, sixth position, fifth position, sixth position. And so we have these left hand motions that are pretty carefully being provided. We also have finger numbers. They're super grainy here, but I think that's a 1, I think that's a 3, and then 2. And so we can see exactly where to put our hands. So I'm sure that you already have this like pretty figured out, like because you've been learning other music. This isn't the first piece that you're learning, and so it should be that stuff. I'm assuming that you have together, but it's just worth saying at the beginning. So obviously, if we're just going to work on one measure at a time, the first thing we want to do is that we make sure we have clear information about where to put our hands. So once we've got that, and you know exactly where to put your fingers for every chord, there are a couple of things that we can do. So we can practice it left to right, and there are some things there that can really help. And then we can also practice in discrete units. And so here's what I mean. Practicing left to right means that we're going to start with the first beat, and then we're going to practice, just the first beat and the second beat. And then we're going to practice, the first beat, the second beat, the third beat, whatever. Okay, so before I say more about that, I'm going to talk about practicing in discrete units. Okay, so we're in 3/4. So we have the first beat, right, which is kind of this big unit. Let's see if I can annotate this. Rectangle. I want a rectangle that has borders and then is not filled in. Cool. Okay, so we got beat 1, right? Which I'm just going to label here. And can I make this narrower? Well, anyway, it's beat 1, and then I'm just going to drag this over because I can't make it narrower. This is beat 2, right? And then this is beat 3. So this is complex music. Okay, so if we just look at beat 1, what are the challenges that we face? Okay, we're playing the low A string, which is open, right? And then we're playing these other 3 notes, this chord voicing, which isn't that bad a chord voicing. It's pretty common chord voicing. It's a little bit outside the scope of this video, so I'm not going to get out the guitar and show you, but I'm sure that you can figure out that chord voicing. I think that's 7th fret on the A string, 7th fret on the D string, 5th fret on the G string. So, it's one of these, which is part of the big A minor bar chord, but only a few of the notes are in play, right? And so then we can just practice, the first 8th note of the beat where we play the open A string, second 8th note of the beat where we play that chord, and then we have, in the last part of that beat, we have a 16th note, right? So we have E, D sharp, E. Okay, so then do we have the fingering there? So we're playing the note E with our ring finger, and then we're going to move to the D sharp with our middle finger, back to the E with our ring finger. And so that's that whole beat. And so we can kind of break up all of the beats this way and be like exactly what's going on in that beat. And then once we know that we're 100% clear on every beat and every hand motion that we have to make in order to perform that perform that beat, then the question stops being about what to do in terms of exactly where, at least for our left hand, everything goes. And the question becomes instead, sorry, sneezing. All right. Um, Instead, the question becomes, how can we do that with maximal effectiveness, maximal efficiency, limiting movement, limiting tension, all of that stuff? And also, how can we internalize those motions? Um, because you're already at this point with the guitar, I'm assuming that you know all of your like right hand, PIMA stuff. Um, and so, it could help to assign left hand finger numbers, sorry, right hand finger numbers, just to be really clear about how you're going to pick all of that. And I'm sure you already have that together, but it's just another kind of foundational thing. Okay, cool. So then let's say that you know all of your hand motions, but every individual hand motion is a challenge. So you can work on just the first beat. I'm really big on timers and metronomes. So let's say that you work on the first beat for 10 minutes, like just that one beat. I feel like if you work on this for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 10 minutes a day for 2 or 3 days, you'll be able to get down all of the hand motions in this beat. Now, before we try to be like, okay, now I'm going to play the first beat and the second beat, let's just work on the second beat on its own. The second beat on its own is pretty straightforward. We have, the two E, presumably with the thumb, the two E's as eighth notes, and then on the second eighth note, you're playing the A and the E again. And so we're still on that same chord voicing. And then, yeah, so there's the question, when you just play the second beat on its own, can you do that? So can you practice that for 10 minutes? And if you can practice it for 10 minutes, can you get it to become very easy? I think you'll be able to. Okay, so then also, by the way, when you're practicing this, you want to use a metronome. Always use a metronome. And I use a timer and I try to create loops so that I'm just practicing the simple motion at a tempo where I can think about it over and over until it's internalized. Okay, so we do that. And then we play the open low E string, right? On the third beat, and then we play, on the eighth note of the third beat, we play this chord voicing again. So there's really only this one chord voicing, and then there's just some ornamental stuff. We're like emphasizing the rhythm by creating this little melody, right? On the A string, E, D sharp, E, E, and then E again, but it's basically this one chord. Okay, so there are going to be some things that you're not really going to be able to encounter in this measure until you start to play it as a whole. So once you've practiced each of the individual, sorry, it's an alarm going off on my phone. Wait, I'm recording, right? Just double checking here that I am recording. Okay, perfect. Yeah, it'd be really be a bummer if this wasn't being recorded. Okay, so there are a few things that you're not going to hear from sort of like a Gestalt perspective, which I believe in psychology means perceiving the whole, perceiving the entirety, the sort of the total effect of the measure until you can play the full measure. Unless you can listen to this, in which case listening to it's really going to help. You're going to notice some bigger picture sounds going on. So you're going to notice that note A, right? And when you play this, when you're practicing the first measure, you're going to have that A in the bass. When you're practicing the first beat, you're going to have that A in the bass. When you're practicing just the second beat on its own, you're not actually going to be hearing that A. And this is an interesting challenge. Oh, I see. That's not an open A string. That's very interesting. Okay, well, that doesn't really actually change that much, but it does mean that something that I said at the beginning is incorrect. So I'll just make a note of that when I post this. Okay, so anyway, you have bass motion, right? So in the first beat, we have A. In the second beat, we're still holding that bass note A, which is actually the fifth fret on the low E string. And so when we're just practicing the second beat on its own, we're not going to hear that bass note. And then in the third beat, we have this note E in the bass. So we hear the bass line, right? And so it's not until you can play the measure as a whole that you'll be able to hear the whole sound, including the bass motion. So once you can play each of these separately, you can create combinations. So you can just practice the first two beats, practice the second two beats. And each time that you work on something new, you're going to notice a new obstacle, a new sort of roadblock that you can focus on. And so when you find a new obstacle or roadblock that you can focus on, you can really zoom in on it and identify that as the challenge. So once you can play the first beat without an issue and you can play the second beat without an issue, the challenge becomes connecting the two. So then you loop the two together until you smooth out all of the muscle memory challenges that are associated with moving between those two beats until you have them. You do that with beats 2 and 3. Okay, so now you have the full measure. Presumably, you're playing it pretty slowly. Again, metronome, great. Slow practice, so much better than fast practice. This is really, practicing slowly is huge. Okay, so you do this, and as you play it, your hands, are going to keep getting more comfortable, and your ear is going to start latching onto the sound of the full measure. And as your ear can really start to pick up kind of the gestalt image of the whole measure, that's probably going to start, or that I think that definitely informs your hand motions as well. And so then that's when you can start to internalize the physical motions and the sound of the full measure so that it becomes a lot more intuitive. And then you can start to really think about how to be musical with it. Which notes are the most accented, which ones are the least accented. You can start to think about dynamics and expressivity and all of that stuff. But this is how I would approach learning this measure. Now, as we go on, there are a lot of other challenges, right? The second measure doesn't look that bad. Third measure doesn't look that bad. Fourth measure isn't that bad. But then we start to get into all this stuff with grace notes. Okay, so then what are we going to do? We've got a slide here. I believe, it's hard for me to see exactly, but I think this is a G sharp sliding down, glissandoing or portamentoing down from G sharp to what I'm assuming is the open E string. That's a challenge. Okay, so again, you practice each unit. So you can assume a beat or you can go smaller. Find the smallest possible unit of challenge and then focus on just that unit of challenge and repeat it slowly, so slowly that you can pay attention to every little element of the movement until it becomes easy. And then you can start repeating that. You can do that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. So I'm sure there's more that can be said. There are a lot of little details, but that's generally speaking the practice situation that's going to help. And then if you run into a specific challenge that you can't solve, what I'd recommend doing is working on this until you know exactly what the challenge is. And then write the challenge down and look at it and be like, what are all of the components of this challenge? Maybe the slide is challenging, or this slide here. Maybe sliding down to the open E string and then, having your hands in the right place to play that note B in the bass is going to be challenging. So just like figure out what that is and just focus on those tiny units, and then you can start to build it up to the whole. It sounds like you've played other classical guitar music, so I'm sure that a lot of this isn't news, but sometimes it can just be helpful to get like a refresher on good ways to work on this. So I hope this is helpful. And yeah, I don't know, feel free to send me a message. Feel free to give me a follow if you like this and if this is helpful. So yeah, cheers and happy practicing.